Home Office officials confirmed that a whopping 514 migrants crossed the English Channel in 10 small boats yesterday. That was the busiest day of migrant arrivals so far this year.
Well, it comes as Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's ambitions to send asylum seekers on a one-way trip to Rwanda has hit yet another wall, with the House of Lords inflicting 7 defeats this time on the landmark legislation yesterday.
Well, joining us now is GBNews Home and Security Editor Mark White. And Mark, this is a very busy time across the Channel. What's driving it?
Well, it's an improvement in the weather conditions, and really it's a pattern that we see every time things calm down in the English Channel. The people smugglers on the other side of that channel will push these small boats out. They haven't gone away, despite what we heard from the government. And of course, last year, the Home Office, Rishi Sunak, was able to say at the end of last year that we are making a difference. It's 36% down in terms of the number of small boat migrants who arrived last year compared to the year before. Now, that is true. Whatever we put that down to, we believe that it was actually more to do with the weather than necessarily government policy there. But whatever you put that reduction down to, there was a reduction. But worryingly now for the government this year, already we're just a quarter of the way through almost of the year, and we are ahead of where we were last year, and quite significantly, between 600 and 700 that have arrived over recent days, 600 or 700 more now than we were at this point last year. So that reduction of 36% is being eaten up quite significantly now.
Mark, what's going on in the House of Commons? The government says, well, in the Houses of Parliament, the government says that the House of Lords are trying to frustrate this bill. The Lords have said, well, hang on, the government could hasten things by having this having the bill debated again and voted on before the Easter. What exactly is your interpretation of events? Who's holding what up? And do you suspect this bill will get through and planes will take off?
I think the bill will eventually get through, there's no doubt about that, but it was always going to be frustrated by those peers in the Lords who were determined to do what they could to disrupt its progress, and sure enough, that's what we've been seeing in terms of the parliamentary ping-pong. Now, the government had theoretically an opportunity, of course, to be able to try to push that bill back through again in the days it has available to it, but it's decided not to do it now before the break. So we are going to be looking at a period after Easter. And then it's being briefed out, of course, to political correspondents and others. What they would be looking to do is to get those planes off the ground and headed for Rwanda soon after this bill is passed. But I can't for the life of me see that that is ever going to happen, because that doesn't factor in what is going to happen in the courts. And there is no doubt we've had a whole industry that's sprung up around being able to ensure the best possible outcome for those claiming asylum. And those lawyers, again, along with the human rights groups and the charities, will be testing this legislation through the courts. And I think it's very likely that it'll go to the High Court, then potentially the Court of Appeal, and maybe right up to the Supreme Court again before we get a final decision. Unless the government is suddenly going to be very brave and just ignore the court process and get these planes off the ground before there's any legal challenge. I can't see that happening, to be honest, if you take them on their previous form.
Yet, Mark, we live in a country of parliamentary democracy. The courts have the right to check government. They don't have the right to check Parliament. Parliament sits above the courts in our system of government, in our balance of powers, so to speak, to borrow a phrase that doesn't ordinarily apply to this country. Frankly, before, what we've seen is the courts attacking the government for not following the will of Parliament and the legislation to the letter of the law as it is written. The whole point of this new safety of Rwanda legislation is that Parliament is expressing its will and the courts can't frustrate that. Do you think they'll still give it a go?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they'll give it a go. And what you have, of course, are lawyers at the Home Office and other government departments who will be very strongly advising the government that they should wait for the full process, the legislative process and the legal process, to run its course before just trying to run roughshod over one or the other. And that's why we've had now, frustratingly, 2 sets over 2 years of court procedures, then going back to Parliament, new bills being passed. And we're at that process again, where this bill will be passed in the coming weeks, but it's likely to be challenged in the courts again. And as I say, going back to my point here, will the government suddenly develop more of a backbone here and decide, look, we've passed the legislation, we're going to get these first planes off the ground, if it's decided later in the court that, we're, in error of the law or international law or something, fine, but we're just going to go ahead and do that. It's possible, but I can't see it.
Well, what's for sure is the House of Lords is only one obstacle in the government's way. Thank you very much indeed, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, bringing us the very latest from the Channel.